Hello, it's so good to be here with you today. Thank you so much for joining us. We are here to talk about a special place that we protected and continue to protect at Santa Cruz Island. Many of you have been there. I've been really enjoying reading the chats already with many of you talking about your special memories and fondness for the place. So we all share that love, and if you don't love it, right now, you're going to love it in another 60 minutes because we're going to tell you so many wonderful things about Santa Cruz Island and the Channel Islands in general. I'm Liz Harvey Roberts. I am so glad to be with you. I'm the Chief Development Officer for the Nature Conservancy here in California. And we have several special guests with us today who are experts in conservation and specifically Santa Cruz Island. So I'm going to look forward to introducing them in a minute. And I also want to say it's just been a pleasure to be with you this year virtually. And thank you for those of you who have been with us before through the several series that we have stood up this year. And in this last third series, we are focusing on places that we protect here in California. So last month, we visited the Dangerman Preserve. And of course, today it's Santa Cruz Island. Now, we were going to focus next month on the Sierra and our Sierra Forest work, and specifically French Meadows. But as many of you know, there's a lot of horrible fires going on in our Sierra right now. So our heart goes out to all of you who have been affected by that, either directly or indirectly. And again, it is a very unusual time, and we just really value your support and your interest in conservation. So with that, let me just get on to the story of Santa Cruz Island. I love Santa Cruz Island. I've been there a number of times in my 11 years here with the Conservancy. And I have a very special memory of flying to the island in a helicopter and flying over a pod of 7 blue whales. It was incredible. And it speaks to the diversity of life, both in the marine environment and on the island. We're going to learn more about that today. Jen Baker is our special guest. She's going to kick us off. She is the director of the Santa Cruz Island staff. John Randall is our chief scientist, focusing on the island and other places in Southern California. And then we have Natty Ridlob, who is a tech specialist, and he's going to tell us about some really exciting work with camera traps and other things. So I know after this is all over, you're going to be saying, how can I get out to the island, especially in this COVID-19 time? Well, we have stood up some special visitation guidelines, and we're going to be sharing those with you afterwards. So if I could just ask you, when we're focusing on this presentation and asking questions about it, let's really think about how we can direct those questions to both Jen, Natty, and John, and we will make sure to get you the visitation information afterwards. Okay, well, with that, let me just introduce Jen. Jen has been with us for years. Many of you may have met her as the hospitality manager at the island. Now she's been promoted to director. She knows that island like the back of her hand. And she's really fun to kayak with too. So if you ever like kayaking, I would recommend Jen. So before we get to Jen though, we're going to do a flyover of the island. So let's just get started and see what an inspirational place it is.
Hello, thank you, Liz. Welcome, everyone. We just flew across the Santa Barbara Channel to Santa Cruz Island, and we're about midway along the historic homeland of the Chumash people, which extends from Morro Bay to Malibu and extends out to the northern Channel Islands. The Chumash people were stewards here long before TNC, and we acknowledge and honor both the painful history and their ongoing connection to this place. Well, my connection began about 14 years ago, before I started working with TNC. Borrowing a friend's kayak, I set out exploring Channel Islands National Park. At the time, I was managing programs for the Public Health Department, specifically for young women who are building new histories or building new futures after histories of abuse. Leading group trips, I observed how the island offered them the chance to connect with the restorative power of nature and their own self-assurance and resilience. In our time today, I hope to offer you a similar chance to discover and connect. There are many dramatically beautiful places that steal our hearts, and one of our island team members calls this the Cupid moment. But the awe I want you to feel today is both from the landscape's astounding recovery and how it promotes conservation victories around the globe. Today, you'll meet two team members who will share about the island's novel species and novel solutions to landscape scale problems. So let's dive in. Whenever I have a chance to fly across the island, I'm struck by its expansiveness. There's 77 miles of coastline holding 96 square miles of peaks, valleys, unique microclimates, and diverse habitats, such that endemic species like the island scrub jay have adapted and evolved independently from neighbors just a stone's throw away. I've been in canyons so remote that I was likely the first human to see, for a young fox to see there. We're just one in 1,000 species that are lucky enough to find this refuge of land in the ocean's waters. In fact, the first human inhabitants of California are believed to have followed a coastal route from the Bering Strait, arriving to the islands over 13,000 years ago. Next. For them and many other species of animals and plants, it became home. And over the generations, the island endemics have dropped and added traits to adapt and thrive in an environment with different conditions. These species adaptations offer important insights into how diversity on this planet can survive through dramatic shifts. Since Santa Cruz Island is 20 miles away from the mainland, next. You might wonder, how did foxes and skunks and other species get here? So let's talk a little bit about the history of the island. Santa Cruz Island is currently the largest island in the archipelago with the highest species diversity, but this wasn't always the case. Before the glaciers melted at the end of the last ice age, there was one big island instead of four, and the mainland was only about 6 miles away, which is a relatively easy swim for a mammoth and not too long for a little skunk to hunker down on driftwood after a storm. Next. Today, these islands and the waters around them are managed collectively by the Nature Conservancy, the National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and NOAA. It's a challenging, dynamic environment, and our partnership attempts to manage the natural resources as a unit. We now own 76% of Santa Cruz Island after giving 14% to the park in order to collaboratively balance the ecosystem needs and public access. And in fact, the portion we donated now receives the third highest visitation across the park. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Gaining firsthand experience in solving conservation problems at a landscape scale is what convinced TNC leadership 40 years ago that Santa Cruz Island was essential to its mission to protect biodiversity. By 1978, it was a denuded dust bowl on a downward spiral and with several species on the brink of extinction. But the vision was far beyond just saving these species. Here's our headquarters for achieving that vision. The Central Valley is a unique feature across the archipelago as the only valley nestled between two mountain ranges, and that creates unique environmental conditions. TNC met here in 1970 and formed the vision for the Santa Cruz Island Preserve. One of the key figures in that conversation was Mildred Mathias. She was a volunteer leader with the Nature Conservancy, and she was also a professor of botany at UCLA and a founding member of the University of California Natural Reserve System. She helped us lay out a value proposition that has lasted over 40 years. First, Santa Cruz Island is a living laboratory with immense value as a bounded system in which you can rule out confounding factors. It's an essential platform for partnerships with academics, conservation organizations, and land managers to problem solve, to innovate, and to export solutions around the globe. And then this place that is near densely populated metropolis is uniquely positioned to engage the community. That may seem surprising, but the paradoxical remoteness and proximity to the mainland make the island an accessible trip to experience an undeveloped California. Well, the journey over the last 40 years has yielded unparalleled successes, like the fastest recovery of a mammal on the endangered species list, the island fox, the creation of exportable strategies which have been replicated on partner sites around the globe, like protocols for Argentine ant eradication and the recovery of rare and endangered plants, and the training of generations of students through our field crews and the UC courses, who are now conservation practitioners training their own teams and students. For instance, this summer, the UCSB Smithsonian Scholars Program, which connects underrepresented students with science opportunities, has expanded their studies remotely using the data from island skunk trapping for their math and statistics courses. And before I need to go, I'd love to leave you with an example of the work that we're doing out here and its broader implications for conservation science. If you're familiar with Santa Cruz Island, then you've probably heard about scrub jays. TNC has been studying these intelligent corvids for years, using the research to inform ecosystem management strategies. The research is really important because these birds only exist on Santa Cruz Island, and they're particularly vulnerable to threats like West Nile virus and wildfires. So right now we're trying to figure out a key question about the jay. How can we maximize their contribution as an ecosystem engineer? That could tell us how to help nature restore itself. The UCSB Smithsonian scholars are conducting this research for us. So what is an ecosystem engineer? Well, another term I love is scatter hoarder, and that gives you a little bit of a clue. The jays, through their caching of acorns, help acorns expand their range, particularly moving uphill against gravity. After a fire burned part of the island's central valley that TNC has long wanted to restore to a native oak woodland, we're treating it as an experimental opportunity, placing acorns out for the jays and then recording their activity. As the next phase of this, on certain feeders, we'll be supplying the jays only with acorns from valley oaks, a species that's scarce on the island and absent from the Central Valley after the ranching era. When valley oaks start to recover in their natural habitat, we'll know that they were planted by jays and we'll be able to measure their success. This is what I mean by a living laboratory. There are limited inputs on an island, so we can actually tell it's the jays at work. And then the lessons that we learn from the laboratory can be used to deploy jays as a cost-effective restoration agent in other degraded ecosystems, which we're really hopeful to do on Santa Rosa Island and the mainland. This is an elegant solution to assist nature in repairing itself by using the landscape as an essential asset to innovation. We're letting it solve problems for the planet. Our team's innovations in conservation science and technology are changing the calculus for conservation by flipping critical problems into novel solutions. So let's talk more about this with John Randall, one of our lead scientists.
Thank you, Jen. Hello, everybody. I'm the leader of our California Island Science team, and I've been with TNC since 1991. I've worked on the island for nearly 30 years. I've had that privilege, and I'm delighted to be able to share a bit about the island's plants and animals and about our on-the-ground conservation work as we continue our virtual tour. 30 years isn't a particularly long time in ecological terms, but I've witnessed stunning changes on the island since 1991. Whole hillsides that were still barren in the early 90s are now covered with native trees, young native trees in this case, Some are covered with beautiful shrublands, coastal sage scrub or chaparral, and others are herb fields. I've also witnessed the recovery of some of the island's animal populations over that time, including the rebound of the island fox and the return of the bald eagle due to the extensive conservation efforts of TNC and of our partners, and the support of many dedicated donors like you. Nature isn't static, and so conservation work is an ongoing and evolving process. We expect big environmental changes in the decades and century to come, especially with climate change. So we're taking steps to understand and prepare for those changes to protect the future health of the island and its species. The island has a rich variety of plants, variety of birds, bats, many types of insects and other invertebrates, but it's got relatively few terrestrial mammals, which makes it really interesting. Let's take a look at a small sampling of plants and animals found only on the Channel Islands. These are called island endemics. First slide. This is the Santa Cruz Island ironwood. It's found on only 3 of the Channel Islands, San Clemente, Santa Cruz, and Santa Rosa. There's another variety with different leaves on Santa Catalina. Our variety has beautiful scallop leaves and lovely clusters of white small rose-type flowers. It is in the rose family. These trees are clonal, which means that they reproduce vegetatively by root sprouts. In fact, the whole stand in this photo is probably a single genetic individual that's connected underground. Next slide. This is the Northern Island bush poppy. It's a woody shrub up to 9 feet high. It's kind of unusual for a poppy to be woody and that big. And it's in the same botanical family as our state flower, the California poppy. You can see similarities in the flower shape. You could also see some native bees hanging out in the flower. Next slide is the Santa Cruz Island lace pod. I love this plant. It's a small annual herb in the mustard family, and it's really quite small, but it's a gem. These beautiful lacy pods, they're so colorful and so interesting, are part of why I love it. It's found only on Santa Cruz Island, and we hadn't seen it in years until 2019, when during surveys in March and April, we found several dense patches of it. I participated in those surveys, and it was a real thrill to see them for the first time. We don't know why they had such a great year in 2019. It might have been the rainfall, the pattern, the timing. Next, we've got 2 island endemic succulent plants. On the left is green studley in this gorgeous, beautiful watercolor painting by Ventura-based botanical artist Ellie Hyunhui Tu. On the right is a photo of the candleholder dudleya. Green studleya, the one on the left, is mostly seen around the north coast of the island. On the other hand, the candleholder dudleya on the right is scattered throughout much of the island. I've seen it on nearly bare volcanic ridges, high atop the island, and down near the coast on the south shore in scrub vegetation. Really interesting distribution. So let's move to some animals. We've heard a bit about the island scrub jay. Let me tell you a little bit more. Today it's found only on Santa Cruz Island, but it formerly existed on Santa Rosa Island, where we hope to be able to reintroduce it. Successful reintroduction could boost the population of the species, and it could make it more resilient to climate change with 2 populations. It could also help out Santa Rosa Island's revegetation, just in the way that Jen described. Amazingly, research has shown that although this species is now restricted to just Santa Cruz Island, 96 square miles, there's been genetic differentiation between individuals. Some jays have bills that are better suited to extracting pine seeds from pine cones, and others have bills that are better adapted to feeding on acorns. So this species is a fascinating study for evolutionary biologists. And by the way, the jay is perched on an endemic oak. This is the island scrub oak. It's one of 10 oak species on the island. We've got lots of oak species. Next, we come to the island fox. This subspecies is endemic to Santa Cruz Island. It's found only on Santa Cruz. There are different subspecies found on 6 of the different Channel Islands. They're really appealing little animals. I saw a pair sitting next to one another in a field near the ranch. And as I walked by, they actually tilted their heads towards each other. It was like something out of an animated Disney movie. They're also one of our most dramatic recovery stories. Their populations declined precipitously in the early 2000s to far fewer than 100 animals. Creative thinking and collaborative action by TNC, by the National Park Service, and other stakeholders eliminated the threats that were knocking their populations down. And afterwards, they've made a rapid recovery. It's a really remarkable story and one that's famous in conservation circles. Next, we see the only other carnivorous terrestrial mammal on the island. This is an island spotted skunk. It's found only on Santa Cruz and Santa Rosa Island. And although they are nocturnal and pretty secretive, we have this as a series of excellent photographs that were taken by John Stulpnagel using a camera trap. This is a spotted skunk, and it's different from the striped skunks that many of us see and smell in neighborhoods across much of coastal and central California. The striped skunks are larger. These little spotted skunks are smaller. There is a mainland relative of the spotted skunk, but it's really rarely seen. So what we usually see is a very different animal, much larger. As Jen noted earlier, being responsible for the conservation management of the island requires us to identify potential problems and to work to understand them and to take conservation action where necessary. In many cases, the problems we've identified and helped solve are problems that other conservation managers elsewhere around the world face, and they've benefited from what we've learned and shared. So a challenge that's come to our attention in the past few years is a concern about the long-term prospects for the island spotted skunk. There have been notable declines in the numbers of skunks caught in our monitoring traps and photographed by wildlife cameras or seen by observers. But we don't really know how much of this decline is due to a real decline in their numbers, and if so, whether that decline falls within the natural range of variability in skunk populations. Or perhaps skunks change their behavior when there are lots of foxes around and become more secretive, harder to trap, harder to observe. Next slide. What makes this more interesting and challenging is that over the 3 decades I've worked on the island, the population sizes of the spotted skunks and the island foxes have seemed to seesaw back and forth with one another. In the 90s, foxes were abundant and skunks were hard to find. In the 2000s, when fox numbers plummeted, skunks were far easier to find. In recent years, foxes have rebounded, but skunks are again hard to find. We don't know whether these cycles are strongly related to one another, as a seesaw analogy would suggest. When one population on a seesaw, one child is high, the other is necessarily low. We don't know if that's it. And if we want to stay in the playground for our analogies, maybe a swing set is a better one, where at any given time, the high position of one swing is unrelated or only indirectly related to the low position of another. So here we're faced with a conservation conundrum, in which populations of 2 different rare species, the island fox and the island spotted skunk, may be competing or may be otherwise interfering with one another. Our conservation actions or our inaction may be decisive in which one survives or whether both survive and thrive. This is an example of the big questions we grapple with when we're working on our preserves. And it's also a problem that conservation has faced in some other systems around the world. And what we learn here can help inform management elsewhere. The good news for the skunk, and for the fox really, is that we're taking action to learn more. We're using 4 methods: trapping and releasing, tracking collars, wildlife cameras, and diet studies to compare the skunk and fox diets. Those of you who know the story of the island fox's recovery may remember that it was critically important that we study the fox biology and the causes of its population crash. And that's what revealed the solution to recovering them. So we're taking a similar approach here. Over the past 2 years, we've worked with and funded researchers from Northern Arizona University to trap and collar island spotted skunks so that we can follow their movements. In this shot, you can see one of the researchers releasing a trapped skunk that's been outfitted with a collar. Their work in 2019, in this video, you can see it. They really are beautiful. This past summer, grad student Calypso Gagoric and field biologist Laura Brenner used a new type of collar that has both a GPS unit and an accelerometer attached. The GPS unit periodically records information on the location of the skunk, and the accelerometer is like a Fitbit that records smaller scale movements. The combined information from these 2 devices might reveal something important about skunk behavior. For example, females that remain in one location and relatively still for long periods are likely to be in their dens. We're especially keen to know more about their maternal dens and the location of those dens, because that's where mothers nurse and care for the newborn and infant kits. To find out how often and when skunks interact directly with foxes, the team is also collaring foxes with the GPS units and accelerometers. We're also using wildlife cameras to understand more about the skunks and about their interactions with foxes and with other animals. Remarkably, some of the images captured on these cameras also provide information on specific behaviors and on skunk life cycles. For example, in this image from Santa Rosa Island taken in May, we see a male skunk. And not only can we tell that he's male, we can see that his testes are descended. And that's something that only happens during their breeding season. This is important because we didn't know when their breeding season started. And this photo gives us a clue. In the next photo, we actually see an island skunk warning an island fox away. This is their warning behavior. He's doing a handstand, and that's a clear warning that it's about to spray. And you see that the skunk is cowering, so he seems to have gotten the message. The sequence of photos was fun to look through because the last one showed the fox zipping away from the scene. What we've learned so far strongly indicates that skunks are more active in the cooler and rainier months. Unfortunately, it's also harder to conduct field work on the island during that period because it's got rugged terrain and it's really slippery when wet roads and trails. But we can do it, and we have plans for more skunk monitoring and research this coming winter in the next year and a half. Camera traps will play a key role in that work. Camera traps may also capture images of animals that we don't want to see on the island, like rats or house mice. One of our biggest fears is that rats could travel to the island hidden on a boat and then jump ship and invade the island. They could quickly wreak havoc on plants and animals on the island. And this fear isn't just one that we have. It's one of the biggest fears for island managers around the world. So we're working with other TNC programs and partners to develop best practices in protecting islands from invasive species. And one of our most promising new tools is actually a cutting-edge version of camera traps. So now I'm turning it over to Maddie Rindlau to tell you more about how we're using camera trap technology to get more useful information in a far more timely manner than we've ever been able to get before.
Thank you so much, John. And hello, everyone. My name is Maddie Rindlau. I am a software developer on our conservation technology team. And I'm super happy to be with you here today to take you on a bit of a deep dive into camera trapping technology. So as John mentioned, we use camera traps pretty extensively out on the island. But before we dive into what the technology looks like today and how we're employing it, I want to talk a little bit about what camera traps are, how the technology has evolved over the last century, and why right now this tech is poised to take potentially a major leap forward, and why that may have huge implications for our ability to observe, monitor, and ultimately work to protect the natural world. So many of you may have heard of camera traps before. They are pretty widely used in conservation these days. But essentially all they are digital cameras, which you strap to a tree out in the field, and they have a motion sensor attached to them. When an animal walks by, the camera is triggered, and hopefully it's in focus and in frame, and you have a nice image of it. This technology is actually very old. So it was pioneered over 100 years ago by a congressman of all people named George Shiras. And you can see him pictured here in the bow of this boat with one of his early cameras. Throughout his life, Shiras was a congressman by day, but also an avid naturalist and amateur nature photographer, literally by night. And he was the first person to realize that if he attached a thin tripwire to his camera's shutter release, stretched it between two trees out in the woods, just maybe an animal would walk by, trigger the camera, and inadvertently take its own portrait. Remarkably, this worked, and he was able to capture images of all kinds of animals throughout Pennsylvania, Michigan, Canada, upstate New York. And it's hard to overstate just how innovative and groundbreaking these images were at the time. So I wanted to share with you a few. People had never seen anything like these before. In 1905, he showed up at National Geographic headquarters with a box of his photos, and the editors were so moved that they dedicated almost an entire issue to them, publishing 74 in a single article. They were the first wildlife photographs the magazine had ever published, and they forever changed the trajectory of the magazine, essentially setting it on course to become what we know it as today. And Shearis's camera trap was nothing short of a revolution in our access to and our ability to observe nature on its own without us being there. And it earned him the nickname Grandfather Flash. On a more personal note, I find these images to be pretty deeply affecting. They possess this kind of stark, elegant beauty. There's also this quality of eeriness to them. It's almost like we're seeing something that maybe we're not quite meant to see, or at the very least is a privilege to see. And for me, with that comes a pretty profound sense of awe and humility. So between 1905 and now, the literal nuts and bolts of camera traps have evolved. Cameras are now digital, tripwires have been replaced by motion sensors, it's all become much cheaper and more accessible. But fundamentally, the practice of camera trapping has remained exactly the same. You go out into the field, you set up your camera, you let it sit there for a long time and collect photos, and then you go back out into the field, often months later, to see the images that you captured. So that model, however, may soon change, and on Santa Cruz Island, we're laying some of the groundwork for demonstrating what the next era of camera trapping might look like. So what do I mean by that? So right now we're exploring two cutting-edge advancements. The first is wireless camera trap networks, and the second is machine learning image processing. I'm going to talk through each separately, and while each is quite remarkable in its own right, when coupled together, these technologies have the potential to provide an unprecedented lens through which we can monitor the natural world. So let's start with wireless camera traps. You can see one pictured here up on Santa Cruz Island. Up until very recently, as I mentioned, the process of getting photos from a typical camera trap is very labor intensive. You have to hike back out into the field, find the camera that you deployed months ago, pull the data card out, bring it back to your computer, and review what may be thousands of images that the camera has taken since you last checked it. Not only is that time consuming for the researcher, but it means that the time between a natural event occurring, so such as the skunk walking into the frame, and a human seeing it could be many months. And while that might not be an issue for some projects like our skunk population study, for other camera trap initiatives that are important to us, like trying to detect the presence of invasive species before they get a foothold on the island, or anti-poaching efforts, that lag time is a huge problem. Another issue is that throughout the many weeks or months that these cameras are out in the field, you don't really have a good idea of whether the data is any good. So this image you're looking at now is clearly beautiful. Those flowers are blue dicks. They were once an important food source for the chumash. But from a camera trapping perspective, this could be an issue. So when the wind blows, one of these flowers or perhaps a blade of grass might move just enough to cause the camera to fire over and over again. And this produces a massive amount of bad data that then takes days to sift through when you're back in the office. And really lots of things can happen out in the field that could corrupt or pollute your data. The issue is if you don't know about it until months later, all of that effort was wasted. Wireless camera traps have the potential to alleviate all of those issues. So how they work is instead of taking a photo and storing it directly onto the camera, they use a low frequency, long range radio signal to transmit their images across a network of other cameras that are deployed in the field. So in this model on Santa Cruz Island, I'm not sure if you can make this out, but the pink points are cameras and then the white points are repeaters. And the lines show the radio connections between the cameras and repeaters. When a camera takes a photo, it propagates it up the network through those repeaters until it reaches a central base station receiver, which then uploads the image to the cloud. And that all happens from the moment the image is taken to it being uploaded to the cloud in a matter of minutes. So this technology means that when a skunk walks by a camera on Santa Cruz Island in some deep ravine, instead of not knowing about it for months and having to go back out to the island to get the data, I know about it instantly on my phone from my apartment in Los Angeles. So that's pretty incredible. We just shrunk that data delay, that lag time between when an image was taken and when it became available to humans from months right down to minutes. That's the difference between snail mail and email. And in the case of detecting invasive species before it's too late, say if a pregnant rat was to show up on the island, that's the difference between having the ability to act fast and avert disaster, versus finding out too late and incurring what could be devastating and irreversible ecological consequences. There are other benefits to wireless camera traps too. Because we can monitor them remotely and because they require less maintenance, that means we can manage them with a much lighter touch and a much smaller on-the-ground human footprint. So on Santa Cruz Island, that saves researchers countless days of hiking across like the rugged terrain you can see here in the background, and into hard-to-reach ravines to pull out those data cards and swap out those batteries. And because they're cheaper to maintain and don't need to be serviced as frequently, that also means that we can deploy them in greater numbers and further afield than ever before, granting us levels of access to places and ecosystems that previously wasn't feasible. So that includes Santa Cruz Island, but it also applies to any remote environment, from the beaches and jungles of Palmyra to the dunes of the Mojave Desert. But although wireless camera traps solve a bunch of problems, they also create a new one. And that is, we just don't have the staffing resources to be standing by our computers or in the basement of some conservation command center, labeling and reacting to all the images as they come into the system. So what we've done is we've solved a data collection issue, but we created a data processing one. We now have this stream of real-time data, but if you can't turn those images into actionable information right away, it's not all that useful. So to address this, we're developing machine learning algorithms to process the images coming off these cameras. Machine learning, that's the same technology that Apple uses to recognize your face and unlock your iPhone. It can essentially automate all of those steps that right now a human has to do by hand. It can determine if the object in the image is in fact a blade of grass or if it's an animal. If it's an animal, it can determine what species it is. And depending on that prediction, it can alert whoever should know about it right away. So on this next slide, there's an example of that in action. I don't know if you can make it out, but the yellow box around the fox was not actually drawn by a person. It was predicted by a machine learning algorithm that was trained specifically to detect animals in camera trap images. In this particular image, the fox is pretty obvious to humans, but it's remarkable what the machine can actually pick out tiny, tiny animals that the human eye has a lot of trouble seeing. So it's pretty cool. No more days spent hiking all over the island to collect data, no more sifting through thousands of misfires and months-old images. You are alerted to the events that you care about as they happen from anywhere in the world. So 100 years ago, George Shiras gave us the ability to see natural places and events that were previously not observable by humans. Wireless camera traps coupled with machine learning will expand on that superpower, allowing us to see natural places and events and react to them right away, right as they happen, in real time, with unprecedented speed and at unprecedented scale. And in fact, the implications are even broader than that, because what I haven't mentioned yet is this very same radio-based wireless networking technology that we use to deliver images from the far corners of Santa Cruz Island to my pocket in Los Angeles can be used to connect just about any type of environmental sensor, not just camera traps. So sensors that measure wind and rain and soil moisture and fog and even audio. So the same network I've been describing has the ability to deliver us pictures of skunks foraging about at night and bird songs as the sun comes up in the morning. It's not an exaggeration to say that this radio-based wireless sensor technology may usher in a paradigm shift in how we do conservation in the 21st century. And frankly, it can't come soon enough. Human-induced climate change is driving species migration and ecosystem disruption at a staggering rate, and we don't have time to wait around for data anymore. We need more data, we need faster data, we need it from the world's most wild, inaccessible places, and this is how we're gonna do it. And Santa Cruz Island, one of the most breathtaking, special living laboratories in the world, is teaching us how to do it. So thank you so much for joining us for our first ever virtual tour of Santa Cruz Island. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a few things. Now I'll turn it back over to Liz Harvey-Roberts to take us into the Q&A section.
Thank you so much, Natty and Jen and John. It's been so wonderful to hear all of this and learn as we go. So now it's time for questions and answers. And I'm very sorry I didn't explicitly invite all of you to type those in, but many of you already did so. So thank you very much. We have plenty of questions to go through in the next 15 minutes or so. But if you have a question and we don't have the time to answer it, please type it in. We will get back to you within the week and we'll definitely kind of amalgamate all of the questions so that we can answer them efficiently. But we'll get that back to all of you. So there's more to learn, and we definitely appreciate your curiosity about the conservation that we are continuing to do on Santa Cruz Island. And I think that you probably have all got the impression, as I have, that this is a living laboratory. There's nothing static about Santa Cruz Island, nor any of the other places that we protect. So before I get to Q&A, I just want to say a shout out to Donald Rubenstein, who is on with us, and he was one of the lawyers that was crucial to negotiating the acquisition of Santa Cruz Island. So thank you so much for that history, and yes, we would love to get you out there again. So with that, we have a question. We have several questions about vegetation, so I'm just going to try to bundle them together. Marilyn is asking, several years ago, my husband and I helped build fire breaks for a fennel burn. So how is fennel removal doing on the island? What about the eucalyptus removal and how is that going? And then just vegetation in general, how is it healthy? I know that the sheep removed a lot of it when they were grazing. How are we feeling about vegetation on the island? So I'm going to direct that to John.
Yeah. So my sort of capsule is that the vegetation is so much better and there's so much more cover of native species now than when I started, that my overview is that it's doing really well. We still do have a lot of fennel. In a lot of areas that were really dense fennel when I started in '91, they've actually been invaded, if you will, by native shrubs. And so I love seeing that. We do still have some big patches of fennel. We are not focused on further controlling that at the moment. We're targeting other species that we think we can fully eradicate from the island, invasive species. In terms of the recovery of the vegetation following the removal of the sheep and the feral pigs, that's been really remarkable. The island silver lotus is one species that was actually listed because it was so rare during the ranching era, and now it's almost weedy. It can be found growing in the middle of our roads. It can be found growing in fields. There's another species we found for the first time really in any abundance just a couple of years ago. It's an endemic to the island. It's a bed straw, it's called, really beautiful plant with tiny white flowers. And now it's really abundant on the North Coast. So there's just been some remarkable recoveries. I could say lots more, but I'll stop.
Thank you so much, John. That's great. We have a question for Jen, and that is, does TNC only work on Santa Cruz Island, or are you involved in the other Channel Islands? And there were several questions also about getting the scrub jay over to Santa Rosa, right? So maybe you could incorporate that in your answer.
Sure. Well, our active management on Santa Cruz Island has provided us with the experience, insight, and a lot of respect from other land managers across the archipelago. That includes the Park Service, the Navy, Catalina Conservancy, US Fish and Wildlife. So as a result, we are invited often to weigh in on land management and biodiversity protection decisions across the archipelago and also down into Mexico, to Baja, the Pacific Coast Islands that lay and that are managed by the Mexican government. There's two examples that I'd like to give you about how we work on other islands. So two critical things that TNC has done. The first is to establish a biosecurity program, and that program is led in conjunction with the National Park Service and the Navy. We have a program manager, and she works across all of the islands to make sure that collaboratively we are preventing invasions of any species out there that could do harm to the ecosystem. And another example is the Islands of the California Botanical Collaborative, which works across the island to identify rare endangered plants that together we can make sure are resilient to climate change. And sometimes that means looking at translocation, but right now we're getting into a lot of work around their genetics and growing out species in nurseries. So that's something that we undertake with our partners across the islands. And then you asked about the jay in Santa Rosa Island. So we have records that show that the scrub jay was on Santa Rosa Island back before the ranching era, had some significant impacts to their habitat. And those were journal entries actually that are held in the Smithsonian. Our hope is that we can reintroduce the island scrub jay over to Santa Rosa Island to expand its range and to create another population so that it's more resilient to the threats that I mentioned, wildfire and disease like West Nile. And it's really important in that way that we're looking at this in terms of structured decision making. So we go through a very intentional, deliberate process with our partners, the National Park Service, the Smithsonian, and others, and looking at what are all of the impacts and potentially unforeseen consequences that could happen to other birds and to other species for instance, on Santa Rosa Island. So that's one element of how we have to really be in lockstep with each other to make sure that we're making the best decisions for nature.
Thank you, Jen. We have a lot of questions about skunks and foxes, and I'm going to try to, again, bundle them as much as possible. And I guess I'll go to John with this. If you could talk about the skunks, do they have the smell glands that the striped skunks do? What do the two mammals eat? How is the fox population doing right now? Yeah, and do we think that they predate? Does the fox predate on the skunk or not? And if you could just give us some more information about that.
Sure. So let's see. The skunks do have scent glands. The researchers who work with them say they're not so bad. They're milder than the mainland spotted skunk and milder than the striped skunk that we're familiar with. I've smelled them up close and I think it's really strong. So I have my own opinion of that. But the researchers have been sprayed a few times and they said it's not so hard to wash off. It does stick with you for a while though. The animals, let's see, the fox is doing really well. The population, we think maybe right around its carrying capacity on the island. So we think there are, the estimates from our monitoring work give us figures of about 2,500 individuals on the island this year. We don't know the numbers of the skunks right now. The stats that our trapping have given us don't give us the ability to estimate their numbers. The diets of the two animals look like they overlap. The foxes eat a lot of deer mice. There's an endemic subspecies of deer mouse on the island and some other small animals, grasshoppers and such. They eat a lot of manzanita berries. They're like humans, they eat lots of stuff. They're very much omnivorous. The skunk appears to be really more predatory, if you will, but it mostly seems to eat animals that live in the ground. So it eats Jerusalem crickets, it eats grasshoppers, other things like that. So, was there more?
You mean the potato bug?
I don't know if they eat earwigs. I would love it if they eat.
Okay, and so for Natty, we have a question. So where else are we deploying these camera traps? And is it only on island ecosystems? And just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for sure. So it's not only on island ecosystems, but we are in the process of deploying a network of cameras and other sensors on Palmyra. But Dangerman will likely be next. But really, this is pretty novel stuff, and Santa Cruz Island has been our primary test bed for evaluating the efficacy of the technology. But yeah, I mean, like the same connectivity and conservation challenges that make radio-based sensor networks such a good fit on Santa Cruz Island. So the need for real-time data for invasive detection and the difficulty of actually getting out there and accessing remote parts of it, and of course the lack of self-service Wi-Fi they exist in a lot of the preserves we manage, as you can imagine. So we know what we're doing here is all highly scalable and applicable elsewhere.
And just a follow up to that, are these being uploaded in real time? And is there a satellite link on the island?
Yeah, they are being uploaded in real time. That's how I'm able to access them from my phone and on my computer in LA. The uplink is, it's not satellite. There are certain points on Santa Cruz Island where we do have Wi-Fi and internet access. And that's basically where we put the base station. So we don't actually, the cameras don't require Wi-Fi beyond a very, one central location. But yeah, you do have to have a base station that's connected to the internet if you want to get them in real time.
Thank you. So we have more questions. Everybody has questions about animals, which is wonderful. What about exotic rats and house mice? So I know we mentioned rats in the presentation. So maybe, John, could you just speak to have we seen evidence of rats? How have we eradicated them? If so, what is the threat? How do we manage that?
So we thought we'd seen rats a couple of times on the island in wildlife cameras and on a couple of times with sightings around boat landings. We checked them out rigorously and we have found them to have been not true. So far as we know, we have not had a live rat survive on the island. There was once when a carcass flattened was found, might have come in like a big bundle of material and it got crushed maybe even on the boat on the way out. That's scary enough. I don't know of any examples of house mice being seen on the island. What really scares us about them getting either, but especially rats and any of several species of rats getting to the island is that they're really highly reproductive. They breed like rats and they feed on a lot of things. They will attack baby birds. They will attack seabird nests and eat the eggs. They could kill a lot of the plants that are in low numbers because they feed on plants as well, especially seeds. They'll eat acorns, for example. So they could be devastating if they got in real high abundance. The actions we're taking are at this point largely preventative. We have worked with this concessionaire that runs the boats out to the island so that they're taking precautions to prevent rats from getting on board in the first place, and then preventing any that might be on board from reaching the island when they pull up to the piers. So lots of work like that. I could say more, but again, I'll stop here.
I think we have time for one more question. So I'm just gonna ask about conservation techniques pioneered on the islands. Thank you, Eric, for this question. How have we seen evidence of conservation techniques pioneered there being exported to other places? And just kind of a broad question about how we scale up. And yeah. John, take this away.
Sure, thank you. Maybe the most concrete example is with the feral pig eradication on the island. So it was one of the largest islands where this was attempted. And some of the work involved very careful tracking of all the actions that were taken spatially so that we could understand exactly where we had been and where the pigs were dispatched. And that has been copied on various eradication efforts around the world. So that was one aspect. There was also a lot of really interesting, this gets kind of in the weeds, but the statistics we use to figure out when are we sure enough that the feral pigs there's none remaining was kind of an advance for folks. Because a big question, the last few creatures are often really difficult to find. And so, but if you don't eliminate them, the population can just come roaring back within a few years. So we pioneered that area of work as well. And again, there's lots more, and I'll stop.
And the ants, we haven't been able to mention the ants too much, but
yeah,
getting rid of the Argentine ant.
We along with my household and many households across California had an Argentine ant problem on the island. Probably introduced near an old experimental Navy site on the south shore of the island, gosh, in the 60s or probably 70s or 80s. By the time we were able to take action on it, it had grown to about 1,000 acres in 4 different patches. We could talk more about how it spread, but we really took some innovative steps to deliver a special kind of very low concentration of bait to these infestations. The reason we use really low concentrations is because we weren't interested in killing the foragers. We wanted to eliminate the colonies, which meant getting to the queens. And so we've been largely successful. We are doing some what I'll call mop-up operations still on sea bluffs near the South Shore, which are quite hard to treat. They're relatively small. We're down to probably 7 or 8 acres now total. So there's actually, John Knapp is on the island today working on that along with others.
Well, thank you so much to you, John, and to you, Natty and Jen. We so appreciate your expertise and your dedication. And to all of you that dialed in with us and joined us, we really appreciate your support. If you would like to help us on the island, you can definitely designate gifts to any of the work that you've heard about today. Of course, we love general operating support too, most flexible. And we're so thankful to those of you who have remembered us in your estate plans and that give us current gifts and annual support. It's all very valuable, and it fuels what we do on the ground, in the ocean, and in water. Again, I would love to invite you to our next webinar. Unfortunately, we got a little stymied in planning that due to wildfire, but we do have a PBS partnership that we'd like to invite you to join, and this is through the global organization. And I'm just going to refer to my notes here. It's called The Age of Nature. So you can find it on your local PBS stations. It launches on October 14. We will definitely give you links to access that and get more information about when it's going to appear on your local PBS station. And once again, I just want to thank you so much for joining. Please do fill out the survey that you will get at the end. Also look for the answers to the questions we couldn't get to. And we always want to hear from you about how you think we're doing and any suggestions you have for future programming, because we definitely want to provide you the information about what we're doing that is compelling to you and answers those conservation questions you have, because we're all in this together to protect our planet during this next determining decade. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.